Today I want to show you a few different watercolour techniques that I used to paint this little chickadee. To me, a beautiful watercolour painting is transparent and full of light. The luminosity in those first washes that you put on the paper are important to the success of a painting. So when I paint my birds, I try not to put the paint on too dark right at the start. For example, the darkest part of this little chickadee is the feathers on the head. When I painted these feathers, I didn't start painting with a really dark black. Instead, I painted a light wash of black and I built it up with successive layers. Another important thing that I want to point out to you is that I didn't completely cover each layer with another layer. I allowed areas of the first wash to still be seen. Beautiful effects are created by leaving areas of the early wash untouched by the next wash. Here on this yellow robin, I've done the same sort of thing. I painted a light layer of grey first, and then I painted successive transparent layers over the top. But each time I don't completely cover one layer with another. I leave areas of each layer showing, and that creates all this beautiful texture. I painted this bluebird here the same way. So this is the first wash, and you can see it's not very dark, it's quite pale. Then I start to build over the top of that light wash. Then I layer again with another wash. And each time I'm leaving areas of that lighter first wash showing. Now I'm going to show you bits and pieces of this little chickadee painting. The full-length tutorial will be on Patreon soon. Patrons will have access to the line drawing, a progress photo, and my finished painting. Okay, let's have a look at this little painting. I'm painting on Arches cold press paper here. I'm using a mop brush just to paint some water on. What I want to do is start painting the apricot feathers on the side of the bird. There's also a strip of them underneath the white feathers on the head. I want to paint on the wet paper because I want all my paint edges to be soft. I'll show you the water on the paper now. So you can see there's a sheen on the surface and there's no puddles lying anywhere. So onto that wet paper, I'm painting some raw sienna. And I just want that paint to bleed across the surface and just create a soft apricot colour. So I'm just flicking some of that paint down onto the dry paper there. And now I want it against the wing here. So I just run it all the way down the side of the wing and it bleeds back across the body. You can see that the colour is very pale, and this will dry even softer than this. It won't be quite this dark when it's dry. Okay, I've moved ahead. I've painted in the background and I've put some grey feathers on the back of the bird there. Now I want to put those same grey feathers on the front here, but I want to work on the wet paper again just to keep all the paint edges soft. This area just here on the chest I've wet. The feathers on this area are white, but I just need some grey to paint through them just to break it up a bit. So this is grey that I've mixed up with French ultramarine and burnt sienna. I only want a small amount of grey here because I want to keep the white paper showing as much as possible. And I also want this colour to be quite pale. This area down here is in shadow, so I'm going to put some of that grey paint down there as well. This I can paint on the dry paper because there's only hard edges here. This first layer of paint will sit underneath the other layers of paint. The new layers of paint that I put over this one won't completely cover it. You'll still see areas of this paint layer showing. I'm using my brush up on its tip and I'm flicking it just in the direction the feathers would go. I'm pulling that paint back up into those apricot coloured feathers. Now I've started painting the feathers on top of the head. I'm using watery lamp black here, just painting on the dry paper. I'm flicking my brush in the direction the feathers would grow. I will go back to that other area when it's completely dried. I've moved around my paper so I'm standing at the side of it because I like to pull these strokes towards myself rather than flick them away from myself. I'm using watery black because I need to start off light and then I will add some darker colour over the top. I pull that colour back into the white feathers to create those jagged edges on the white feathers. You would have seen me do a similar thing on the bee in the video last week. Now that that has dried, I'm coming back with some darker colour here. This is lamp black again, but it's much darker than that first layer that I put on. Here I've dampened the paper, just so that my paint edges will remain soft. I'm painting very carefully around the edge of the eye, and then once I get away from the eye, I can push the paint out. Now I don't want to completely cover that lighter colour that I've got there. I want to leave it showing in some places. I'm always pushing that paint in the direction of the feathers too, just the way they would grow. I've changed positions again. I'm on the other side of the table or on the edge of the table so that I can paint these feathers this way. You can see I've left some lighter grey feathers at the top of the head there. So I haven't taken this darker black paint all the way out to the edge. I couldn't be bothered mixing up a black, so I've just used lamp black for this area. Now I'm starting to paint in the feathers that are on the wing. I'm using lamp black again. This time I've switched down to a smaller brush, just so that I can leave the white paper showing around the edges of the feathers. Now there's another feather here, a larger one. I'm painting the lamp black on it. I'm leaving a white edge around the outside part of it. I'll just get a bit more paint. So I'm using the watery lamp black. You can see I've left a white edge around the outside edge where it touches the other feathers. Flicking it into those grey feathers above there. Now I'm going to start painting the longer flight feathers. I've already painted a pale wash of grey over the top of these feathers. It's dried. And now I'm using my liner brush and some lamp black just to paint over my pencil lines that I've got there. Okay, I've finished those feathers and I've gone ahead and painted the rock and the tail. So now I just want to add a shadow down here under the wing. So I've got grey on my brush again and I'm painting on damp paper here. Put a little bit of moisture there just to keep those paint edges soft. And then I can push that paint up into the dry paper if I want harder edges. So here the paper's dry, but closer to the wing there the paper's wet, which keeps those edges soft. I need a bit of a darker colour down here as well. So here I'm just painting on the dry paper. So what I'm doing is pushing that paint into the lighter grey to create the edges of the lighter grey feathers. So I'm painting negatively there. I do this on a lot of my bird paintings. I paint a lot of the feathers negatively. So basically what I do is just paint a darker colour underneath the feather and then I pull that darker colour into the lighter colour to make the edge of the feather. That sounds confusing. I've shown you this before in another video, so check that out if you want to know more. But basically I form some of my feathers on my bird paintings by painting them negatively. I'll show you again quickly here on some paper. I've got my journal here and I'm painting some water underneath what will be a feather. This pink wash is dried. Now I've got some paint and I'm painting underneath the feather and around it. And that water on the paper keeps my paint edges soft. Painting negatively just means that you're painting around something rather than on something. So this is what I did with the Chickadee. I had that lighter wash underneath and then I just painted the paint on to the dry paper and I just flicked my brush back up into that lighter colour to create the feather. So the only difference between the two was the first one I did there was on damp paper and this one I've done on the dry paper. That's what I just did there on the underside of the Chickadee. Okay, continue on. Now just here underneath the bird I want to continue the splash. At the moment, it just looks like it's sitting on the right-hand side and I want it to just come down through here. I think it will look better if I continue it down through there. This is raw sienna that I'm using. So that just looks like that splash then continues down past behind the bird. Here I've just pulled some of that lamp black down onto those white feathers just to dirty them up slightly. So there, I think I'm finished. So I'll just take the tape off. And there's my little Chickadee. So, just recapping, when I paint a lot of my birds, I try to keep my colours light at first, and then I build on top of them. But I leave areas of each wash showing, which creates beautiful effects on the finished painting. And it's just another one of the reasons that I adore painting in watercolour. Thank you for watching. Please give this video a like and hit that subscribe button. And I will see you again next week with a new tutorial. For example, the darkest part of this little Chickadee is the feathers on the head. There's a fluffy bit that ran into my head. Another important thing I want to point out to you is that I didn't completely cover each. I didn't completely cover each. Another important thing that I want to point out is what is it? What is it that you want to point out? Another important thing I want to point out to you is that I didn't completely cover each. Why can't I say each? Seriously, each. Eyebrows. That's what I just did there on the underside of that Chickadee. Okay, continue on. I just looked at myself. So that's what I just did there on the underside of the Chickadee. Okay, continue on. Looks like I'm shooing you away. Shoo. So, just recapping, when I paint a lot of my birds, I try to keep my colours light at first, and then I build on top of them. But I leave areas of each wash showing, which creates